Hello and welcome again to the Cult Products podcast. My name is Phil Keeney-Bolland.
And my name's Adam Yaya-Durrant.
And today we are joined by another very special guest, somebody that I worked with way back, probably about a decade ago, I think, actually on the very first digital product that I ever worked on. Interestingly, and that is JP. So welcome to the podcast, JP.
Thank you for having me.
So we're here today, as ever, talking about B2B tech startups. And in today's episode, one of the things that we're going to talk about is how you can get traction before you've actually built and launched a product, value proposition testing. And I think this is a really interesting area because it's one of the things that I'm not sure everybody does, or even necessarily knows to do, or why it's important. So I think this is going to be a really interesting episode. But before we dive into that a little bit, people I think probably by now know who we are. We're the founders of Yaya, a design agency. We help B2B tech startups to get off the ground. JP, do you want to tell us a little bit about your backstory? How did you get into product and startups?
And so I was born and bred in Argentina, and I started designing value props and digital products very early on. My first job was I was an analyst, and I got drafted into the R&D team, and after that I co-founded an agency in Argentina and built over 150 apps for people like HBO and ESPN and Sony and so forth. Had a briefly office in Miami, and then moved to the UK and worked at a different agency, again building another 150 apps for all sorts of different companies. And I think it was the last maybe 7 to 10 years I was looking at everything that we built over time, and I always say we build the good, the bad, and the ugly, meaning that there's a handful of projects that were really good and that had taken off and they had a lot of traction and people were still using them, and we're talking about millions of users and it sounded great. And then there was the bad, which was things that people download it once and we get them to download it, but they never use it, never keep coming back, and they use it once and never again. And then the ugly, which is all the experimentation stuff that we should have never done, especially on the UI side when we try to reinvent the wheel and stay away from conventional stuff. And in the last 7 years, I've been concentrating on making sure that we only build the good. And that started with part of what we're going to talk about today, which is value proposition testing. We figured out that the first thing that we needed to do is to make sure that before we even lay a line of code, what we were offering in black and white, in paper, in letters, was something that people at least were, saying that they want. We will go from professed to, observed in a second, but at least they were professing that they wanted it, right? And we've developed this method to develop and design a value prop to make sure that, you hit the mark when you release your product, basically.
So your business today is called Who's Fabio?
Yeah.
And so your I guess your value proposition then is, I guess, not making the kind of avoidable mistakes of trying to build a product before you know that people actually want it.
Yeah.
And so I guess you're saying that's kind of the number one thing. Interesting that you always stop at 150 apps.
Yeah.
that's a conscious thing.
We're done now.
2 sets of 150 is enough, right?
Yeah. Specifically spent your life calibrating your own personal algorithm and gathering data on what makes these things successful. So across those 300 apps, I guess the thing that you realized was having clarity on value proposition early is the golden thread across what makes them successful. Is that fair?
Yeah, the word clarity is so important when you're building a product. when you have a product idea and it's not that clear and not that cemented, the way I describe it is like going into a room that has 20 doors and all lead out of the room. And you try to pick the first lock and it's difficult, so you pick the next lock and it's like not so difficult and you get through the second lock. But you don't know where that's going, right? This is the process in which we typically design or define products. We just like, we want all of these things. Like, well, this is very difficult. This is very difficult. This is very difficult, but we can do that, right? And the way we do it is like, imagine all the doors were open and we can test absolutely everything. And then we know that the key feature is this lock that is very difficult, right? We're gonna kick the door down if we have to. The other ones don't exist. You're in a room with one door, right? Because you know that that's the feature that's gonna get you to people to say, I'm interested in this. I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna download it. I'm gonna try it. It's clarity is the key. Having clarity of what really is going to drive traction for the target audience that you've defined, and having clarity around how people struggle today to get the job done are the two things that I would say is like core of our value proposition. Really, like I've done a lot of research and I know how research sometimes is super fluffy, right? The one I typically use is like the ones you get on those posts where it says like 72% of millennials will consider if a company has a biodiverse approach towards nature before considering a purchase. It's like, what are you telling me? What is this? That means nothing. That's just fluff, right? I'm telling you, these are the 4 variables and these are the actions or decisions that your client is struggling to execute when trying to brush their teeth, okay? They struggle to get the right pressure from the brush to the teeth. They struggle to ensure that the right amount of time is used on each teeth, right? On each tooth, sorry. My Argentinian background. And then we create a product that does that has a little red light that when you push it too much, it goes red and you know that you need to ease out. That has a thing that goes zzz, 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 when you need to move to the next one, right? Those are all features that come from an observed struggle of a user. And understanding that is the key of being able to come up with a feature. There is no feature without struggle. And that's another thing that sometimes, you're designing a product and you just want to put stuff on it, right? It's like, where's the struggle coming from that feature? I want to know how people struggle. Why you came up with it?
We talk. We've over the years, I think, found a lot that frustration is a great source of innovation. Like I think the more annoyed you are at the start of something, often the kind of more interesting the solution ends up being. I really love the fact that you've got this level of focus in your business, and that the focus is value propositions. We talk about them a lot, and I think there are lots of reasons. We'll get into this, obviously, why they're so fundamentally important, but also the kind of businesses that I think we really like working with are the kind of businesses where somebody spent a long period of their career doing something and then spotted a way of doing something differently, and then just decided to focus on that. And the fact that you've gone, actually, value propositions, that's going to be the center of what we're doing. It just feels really, really clean, really focused, and really high value. I mean, everything you just said, we see a lot. And I feel like with the value propositions in, the sort of startup world, they underpin so much of what the business does, or they sort of should. But they're either, I think, maybe taken for granted, or they're not kind of formally written down and agreed. So then you do end up in, and the way that it manifests itself, like you say, is you end up in conversations where you have an engineering team who are saying, well, right now the easiest thing for us to get to is this feature
here,
but the dimension that's missing from that is which is the thing that's going to add the most amount of value to the product. So you're always going to have this balancing act. Some of the most valuable things are the hardest to execute. Some of the easiest things to execute aren't actually linked to the value. And you do sort of want to be making progress in both spaces, and that is a broader thing, which is like, as a startup, where do you put your chips? Where do you place your bets? And I think for me, that's where the value proposition is really, really useful, because it says, go for red or go for black.
100%. And if you look at a really good core value prop, there is no onboarding, there is no login. No, once we I'm just stamping a couple of steps, but once we've created a waiting list that says, okay, these people really want this value prop, we run a pilot, and that pilot, you're not allowed to do onboarding. You want to onboard 50 users, that's fine. Get yourself a keynote, and you're going to onboard 10 users at a time, and you're going to call them on WhatsApp, and you're going to onboard them manually. That's it.
Yeah.
There is no login. This magic link, and we send them a link manually to the version where they're logged in, right?
Yeah.
Because you need to put all your chips in the one thing that, in the red light that tells them they're putting too much pressure, on the thing that tells them that they need to move on to the next one, right? You need to go back to, that's the thing that you want to test. You don't want to test the fact that you can do a nice onboarding that people understand. Also, to be honest, you can't really create an onboarding without onboarding 50 people manually. Once you've onboarded 50 people manually, you're now in a position to start thinking about what that onboarding looks like. Yeah. Before that, it's all make pretend.
I always feel like onboarding has the potential to be such a massive part of products, and it's hard to do really well. But whenever we sort of test an onboarding flow, the thing that people click on isn't like next, it's next. Skip. Yeah. It's just get rid of this and let me figure it out. Before we get it too deep into the into things, I've had a couple of different conversations about value propositions in the just even in the past couple of weeks, where different people have defined them as different things. Potentially, let's just say salespeople might have a view of what a value proposition is, tangibly what it is, like what the sort of framework they use is. Product people might have a different way of thinking about it. When you say value proposition, what are you describing?
Yeah, we have a very clear recipe for what we say is a value proposition. It starts with what our definition of a startup is, which is is a market, a product, a channel, and a model, right? It's who you're targeting, what are you and how they struggle, what are you offering them, how are you going to acquire these users, and then what are you going to charge, who are you going to charge, and what are you going to charge them for. For us, the value proposition is a very simple explanation of a one-liner of what your product does, one line for each key feature that you have, and then the model. Who are you going to charge? What are you going to charge them for? And how much are you going to charge them? You cannot put people into a waiting list without telling them how much this is going to cost, because that's not a waiting list. Okay? It needs to be very clear who's paying for this and how much are they paying for this and what are they paying for. They're paying per click, they're paying per apple, they're paying per dollar, whatever they're paying for, it needs to be super clear, because you've not converted anyone unless you communicated that. So one super clear line of hierarchy what your product does, 3 or 4 lines, one for each feature, very clear what the feature does from a jobs to be done point of view, and then the model, who's getting charged and what are they getting charged for and how much.
That's really interesting, because there's a lot of overlap there with how we would define it, but we at the same time, I'd say, define it almost totally differently. It sounds, and I think what I mean by that is you've gone to detail in places that we don't get as granular in the detail of, and I suspect that's probably because you've got this end goal in mind of specifically waiting lists.
Yeah, and testing the value prop, right? The waiting list for me is the proof. We have this, especially for founders, it's really valuable. It's this promise and proof model, where it's okay, 3K, what proof are you going to generate? What are you going to promise me? I'll promise you I'll validate the value prop. Okay, how are you going to do that? The proof is the 2,000 people that I'm going to have on a waiting list, right? It's not that I want to build a waiting list, it's that I don't want it to be my opinion, right? It's not my opinion. It's the market that gets to say whether this is a value proposition or it's not a value proposition that they want. And the only way that I found to do that was to just pile people onto a waiting list.
So the way that you define it has basically come from the experiences that you've had over the years and the mechanics of the testing that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
So that's really.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so the way that we think about it is as I say, it's at a sort of higher level with like less detail. And I think what we try and do is we try and say, what the sort of four key elements of it are firstly, who is your customer, and I think that you can have lots of different customers and lots of different people who are involved in sales, but having a sort of primary, I think, is really important, because you want to try and keep things as simple as possible. We've spoken a lot about, one of the pitfalls a lot of businesses fall into is they create loads and loads of personas, and then suddenly it just becomes this like really muddled, generic sort of compromised messaging. So we like to try and get really focused on that. Then there's the actual value, which is, if we can help that person to solve their problem, what do they kind of get out of it? And then there's how we actually do that. So what is the product or the service, whatever,
features that
unlocks
come
the
in.
value. And then the final thing is how is that different to what everyone else is doing, who's also trying to solve those problems for those people. And then I think, when we get into things like websites and stuff, it does start to become a bit more granular. But what I think and by the way, we also use jobs to be done in the creation of that. I think that that's a really fundamental thing, because if the value isn't linked to a thing that customer, that user is actually trying to do, it's quite superfluous, and you want to try and get it linked, obviously, to high priority, high consequence jobs as well. Like, if we fail at this will be catastrophic for the business. If we're successful at that, it'll have a meaningful impact. I think what's really interesting about the way that you're approaching it. So you could, playing devil's advocate about the way that we do it, say that's great, but how do I prove that it is it is correct? Where's the sort of quantitative data that we can test on that thing? Whereas I think the way that you're thinking about it, with that kind of end test in mind, I really like that, because it's just super focused on, as you say, clarity, and you can actually kind of then go and get some proof points on it.
Yeah, and you talk there about like having multiple personas and stuff like that. Like the way we do it is like you're allowed to do as many personas as you want, as long as they all struggle in the same way. We segment only on one variable, and it's the things that they find difficult to do when they're trying to get the job done, right? If they all struggle in counting the amount of time that they spend on each teeth or each tooth or whatever, however it's said in English, and the pressure, I'm fine. You can put, anyone that you want into that pile. It could be Ozzy Osbourne, and it could be also Justin Timberlake. I don't care, as long as they both struggle in that way. The only segmentation that matters when you're designing the value prop is that they struggle in the same way. When it comes to the design of the solution and the UX and so forth, you're talking about consumption, and of course, those two users are going to be wanting something completely different, right? Even the technology that you pick or the platform that you're going to do it on is completely different. I'm not talking about solution. I'm just talking about the value prop and what it does, and how do we get to a group of people that we can really test the value prop. So to give you an idea, what we do is we do a screener to even start the interview of testing the value prop. And if they're not indexing in those four problems, it's like, maybe this guy is not. And we probe a little bit more, and we try to figure out whether that person is or is not a target audience. And then we rethink whether, maybe a target audience is too small. There's too little people struggling only with this, 3 or 4 things. And we should change that. But the value prop is only tested with people that are your target audience, and they've been segmented through struggle. And I say that because we're very polarized in the way we see our market. we see a market in like masters and strugglers. And Phil, you were talking about a second ago, it's like you like to work with founders that have spent like 10 or 15 years in an industry and now they want to build a product, right? Those is what I call typically a master. And those guys have like their Excel spreadsheets, and maybe they build something on no code that they use themselves. And, it solves all the little problems that they had doing the job manually. And they perform really well. Masters perform, but they have all these tricks that they do. So what we do is we sit there, we find some masters, we screen them in, right? And we just observe them doing the job, right? And we note down everything that they do. And then we go and grab a couple of strugglers. And we say, can you please get that job done? And we just go, oh, they didn't do this one. They skipped that one. It took them 40 minutes to do this one here. And this one here, they didn't even, they had no idea that needed to be done. And then we say, okay, what we know is that the strugglers plus our product equals a master. Meaning whatever the struggler is not doing that the master is, the product should do for them. If they're doing it now, just leave it. They're doing it now. You can make it into the product later and have one platform that does everything. But it's the key of the formula is masters equals product plus struggler. Then you know that you have all those little features that the master had in his back pocket into a product that they can consume. And they all perform. And the difference between before, without you, like the crutches, right? Without the crutch, you can't walk. With the crutch, you can't walk. You're going to take the crutch.
I really love that. And I think one of the things that is really cool about that way of thinking is I think a lot of the people who end up founding businesses in this space, who are those kind of masters, they start off back to that frustration point. They're doing their job and they're going, the problem is we're not doing this thing. And if we were doing this thing, we'd unlock more value. And then they start doing that thing. Or they go to their boss and they say, we need to start doing this thing. And their boss says, no. And then either they go, I'm right about this because I'm using this tool, or I just know that I need to go and fix this so that we can do things better. Yeah. And then what they then do when they launch the product is they say, okay, everyone else who hasn't figured this thing out yet, or who hasn't got access to this thing, now you can achieve mastery as I've defined it by using this. Yeah. So it really just maps nicely onto who we generally see as the most successful founders.
And we used to find them online a lot. And if they weren't there, like for example, when you go, I love like old school motorcycles. I rebuild 1950s to 1980s Japanese bikes. I love it. And you go on Reddit, and there's only one or two guys that give you all the answers to the bolt that's missing because it came without, and I don't know what's missing, and it's not turning on. And you tell them what it is, what's happening, and they know, right? Those are the masters. And what we do is we either look for them so that we can talk to them, or we also breed them, meaning we tell the founder, you want to be that guy. You want to be that guy on Reddit answering all the questions that everybody has. Why? Because you naturally want to help people do this. Because your product is going to help people do this. So you're naturally inclined to go out there and help people. And the day you have a pilot version of your product, you're going to say, guys, I've created a pilot version to do this. People are going to jump in. Why? Because they know you, because they know that you are passionate about getting that job done. And that's what you like to do in your spare time. That's the founder I want. The guy that's like going to bed, putting his head on the pillow and thinking about, how are you going to make this better?
Yeah. And also that you don't know, I think somebody told me this a while ago, said you don't really know what's valuable to other people. They know what's valuable to them and they'll tell you what it is. But that's why it's great to go out there and just put as much valuable stuff out into the world as possible and then leave space for things, things to sort of pop up that are unexpected. And for somebody to say, do you know what? It's great that we just had that conversation about this thing. And you might be thinking, what, you found that really useful. That was just a really trivial thing to me that, I didn't realize was important. But and also it's great to say, my assumption is this is a real high value thing, and people are like, this is confusing. It's 50 steps ahead of where I am. I'm not interested. So
that's why testing the value prop early before you lay a line of code is so powerful because you're doing a pivot with zero money, right? You're like change is going to happen. Like we had this founder, he was a technical founder, amazing guy. He could lay code in the evenings after he did his job, right? And we said, Phil, you need to go and test the value prop. We'll put the value prop down in a meeting. Like we write it down, you agree, we'll test, for comprehension, and you're going to run some interviews. And we ran some interviews, and the guy came back and it's like, I'm never going to lay a line of code personally without running these interviews. Nobody wanted none of the features that I agree were the features that I was building, right? But I know what they want because we had other conversations and I've already started coding the new thing. And it's like, yeah, right? It's like you've just done a pivot right out of the bat. You didn't have to, even write a landing page that nobody wanted to get engaged with to run 10 or 15 really good interviews with a script with the right questions. Because that's another thing, running an interview is very difficult if you don't have a really good script with really good, concise questions and push the user for an answer. Like we have this method where we lay a feature and say, how desirable is that to you? Right? And the first thing was like, well, yeah. It's like, okay, from 1 to 10, how desirable is that? I couldn't put a number. It's like, well, imagine you could put a number. Well, I think my mom would give it an 8. That means 0. Okay? If they talk about somebody else liking it, that means 0. They don't like it. They're talking about somebody else. You need to learn how to read the interview and accept the fact that people, they want to, they want to be kind. Nobody wants to give you a 0. You need to read the 0. And if they're like 999, but something's wrong, you need to go back. You need to understand. So, testing the value prop as early as you can is quite liberating. Once you've, people talk about embracing change, and we love change and we want to embrace it. The first way to embrace change is to set up your systems, your way of working in a way that is cheap and easy to stomach change. If you lay down code and people tell you that feature we don't want, it's a hard pill to swallow. You've just invested a good percentage of your runway into a thing that doesn't work. And I've sat down with founders like, JP, we need to find a way to make this work. And it's like, dude, I can't do anything. But we've invested all this money. I can't do anything. I can't change the market. So embracing change is about setting yourself up to be able to change, to use no code, to use run a pilot with email and WhatsApp and, work with clients for 12 weeks to try to see if they even are taking what you're cooking,
JP, do you find, do you get much resistance to that kind of approach? Obviously, the example you just said, a lot of people that we encounter are engineer led and they're kind of magpies with features. And obviously I think we were chatting earlier, there's kind of it's sometimes a bit of stigma around value propositions because people interpret it differently and see it as a bit of a marketing guff or brand guff.
Fluff, right? Fluff. It's what are you doing with this fluff? I want to build this product that is tangible and you can see have buttons, some are red, some are blue. It's what are you talking about?
And they can't kind of piece the two together. And I think the way that you describe it and the way that you present the value proposition is quite clear. It's very practical and it kind of joins the two up quite nicely from the brand world to the product world. But do you get quite a lot of resistance? And then how do you kind of change people's perspective around that?
We get a lot of resistance. We work really well where we call it the field of dream kind of founder or client, where they build it and nobody came. And they're like, yeah, okay. So if they got burnt before, they're and we had a handful of clients that were not like that, and they were like, this time we're going to do it with research. It went great. We have we own half of the market. Now we want to do it the right way. But and I'm not saying that ours is the right way. There's it's a million ways to skin a cat, right? I just know the only way that I know performs for me is this way that I have, and it's a method and it's a program. I don't get I don't paint outside the lines on that. We've been iterating and changing it a lot, and we have new features, but so we do get a lot of pushback, especially when it's maybe their first experience in building a product and they feel there's a lot of people that believe that confidence comes from within And I say confidence comes from data, right? How confident will you feel about your value prop or what you're going to build if you had 3,000 people on a waiting list compared to having none, right? Confidence is not like I wake up in the morning, I'm a startup founder and I feel super confident about me and what I'm going to build. It's like, what pieces of evidence do you have? I've done 10 interviews. That's better than just like what you think and your stomach is telling you. So we rate that level of confidence through qualitative, quantitative, and so forth. And then we decide whether they've passed a certain gate to move on to running a pilot.
Yeah.
I think I've never seen Field of Dreams, but I've quoted that so many times. It's such a great thing that's applicable to all these different businesses. I guess that from our perspective, we don't generally get pushback on creating a value proposition as a concept. I'm often a little bit surprised that isn't the first thing that people do when they're kind of starting a startup. But I think that's kind of inherent in the nature of startups. It's a bit like somebody fires a starting gun and then everybody starts kind of running. And generally speaking, I think there are a lot of people who start found-ups who either like come from an engineering background or would see the product as the startup. And by product, I mean the actual UI and the actual coded thing.
Yeah.
So there is a cultural thing here, which is like, how do we get to a built product as quickly as possible, and then we can start learning, and iterating. Yeah. And in some cases that happens, but in other cases, the product that ends up being created isn't linked to the learnings; it's linked to, as we said, the feasibility and like reachability of different features, which then leads to a product which has a lot of features but potentially not a lot of value. I was thinking about this as I was walking the dog this morning. I think there is not resistance to creating a value proposition, but creating value propositions is really hard. One of the things that makes it really hard is because that starting gun goes off, you then have people who are focused on marketing, people who are focused on sales, people who are focused on tech, people who are focused on just general kind of business bit. They've all like gone off.
Yeah, it's too big of a boat to move them in.
Yeah. And periodically they kind of come back together and discuss things, but every moment they spend apart is a moment that they're going down their own path and defining what the product is as something different and driven by different needs that they have. So somebody's got a sales target and they're like, well, I just need to basically agree to what the customer wants. Somebody's got to build it and they're going, well, I need to actually jump on the features that I can release and get out the door. The hard bit about creating value propositions is more, I would say, getting alignment than everything else. So we don't get pushback, but there is a natural
pushback in the content, right? In what you're really writing, and you get 3 people to say yes, and then somebody comes into the room and is like, "This is not the startup that we're building."
Exactly, and that's difficult to manage. Then the other thing that's difficult to manage is that I think we obviously talk a lot in the sort of startup world about agility. I think lean startup, I don't know how old it is now, but there's a lot of like really great stuff in that, but I think some of it's been kind of misapplied in general, and it comes back to that point about like how quickly can we build and then start learning. It's been a while since I read it, but the starting point for lean startup is
like, you don't have to build to learn, and that's the exactly the motto that it's like, dude, you can learn so much by just pitching your value proposition to 10 people, and you can learn so much by building a waiting list. You can, like, for us, building a waiting list is an exercise of design. Running your pilot is an exercise of design. It's not just about finding proof. It's about like making sure like the value prop never stays as we thought it was. And I think the problem here is pop culture. Is this like, we watch these movies where people sit in a room and have this idea about this thing that they're going to build, and the next day, in the next scene, there's a guy coding, and then it blew up, right?
Yeah.
That's like, the social network is like, and at the same time, you see Zuckerberg talk today, and he says, ideas are not fully formed when they they get started. They are formed over time. And once you accept the fact that the idea is intrinsically going to change, you can't code. You can't tell me the code is the best way forward.
So I think I definitely agree with that. I have another theory which I'll mention in a minute. The thing that's interesting about that is like that's where the sort of glory is. The glory is in like having the product. So for whatever reason, the chapters in Lean Startup about smoke testing and things like that, they just never really seem to become as like popular or like ingrained in people. And I think that is because a lot of people don't come from, you know, a marketing background or they're not in that space. They're in like a delivery focused space. So they're kind of like, that's a bit of fluff. First thing is like it's not fluff. It's part of the product development process. It's the easiest thing to start testing and validating and like getting a sense of what your product is before you commit to all that kind of stuff. Next problem. Startups start with a bunch of engineers sitting around, and we've heard this a lot. It's like,
I know.
We need to give the engineers something to do.
Something to do, like, right? And let's do the logging and the onboarding. Because we can change the type. We can change the copy later. It's like, guys,
yeah. I hate that. It's like they got like designers' feet to the fire. It's like, come on, the guys are sitting around waiting for you to drop something. It's like kind of it's crazy. I feel there's a lot of those kind of external pressures, whether they're from developers or from like VCs or whatever. Like it's those kind of things that kind of just push things ahead in the wrong direction or into the development way too early.
And also all the groundwork. Sorry.
It's just not it's not a sensible way to say, look, we have these people and they need stuff to do, so let's give them stuff to do.
I love that.
It's like, I don't know, here's a ball. Just don't like that. But that's quite a fundamental thing. Is like your assumption that you need to have engineers from day one is not necessary.
For me, it's wrong. We don't work with more than one or two founders that are on their own, and some of them are not technical. And the first step that you take on laying code is quite foundational stuff. You're talking about, how your database is going to relate to each other. It's like, when I look at a database, it's like, this is how you see the world, right? It's like, this is how you see the world. You see the world, if you're Google Maps, you see the world in like, waypoints and streets that connect each other and, traffic. That's quite foundational for you to, like, you're nailing yourself down quite a bit just by defining, the entities in your base. So there's a lot of groundwork. We say there's a lot of dirt road to get to the highway. Once you get to the highway, you can start laying it down, but it's dangerous. That's why the way we say it's dangerous. And when we do work for corporates, we do it ourselves. There's no more than one person on the team. Two. That's it.
We worked on a project where the database had to be entirely rebuilt because the engineering process started at the start of the design process simultaneously, and so we had that conversation. Oh, we need stuff for the engineers to do. Well, we can get on with building the back end.
Exactly. Let's build the back end of the database.
Yeah. What's your assumption of how this will work? Probably like this. 2 months later, well, we were wrong about that assumption, but we've built the database. I don't know, you're going to have to build another database. Okay, that's going to cost a load of money. So it was obviously painful for everyone involved. Then I think
there you go. It was painful to change, right? You can't say you embrace change if you set yourself up to being a painful experience. Doesn't matter that here we all embrace change and we all have this motto that change is good, and it's not a state of mind, guys. It's the way you work that defines whether you can change or not.
Okay, so here, this is I think a really key point. I think there's also pressure in startups. Like every startup has a million things that they could be doing, and you basically want to do as a founder is like get rid of as many of those things as possible, so that you can like focus on other things. And so when you're thinking about, and I think we see this probably in in brand, in product, in all these different spaces. It's like, right, we're going to focus on this thing today and we're going to get it done, and then we're going to go and do the next thing tomorrow, which is not agile. It's literally like a waterfall mentality. And I think you mentioned pop culture. The other thing I think that's a factor in this is like how we think about learning is fundamentally wrong. So you have this culture from quite a young age of like you're learning at the ancient Egyptians, you get to the end, you do the test, you get the gold star, and then I think people kind of grow up through that, and like a lot of really high performing people, then they need this sort of loop of validation, and they become more and more successful, really intelligent people, who end up going to like top universities and getting firsts and all this kind of stuff. The way that they see learning is that like they learn the thing and then they get the mark for how well they've learned it, and then they move on to the next thing. And I think that I think this is where one of the challenges is within startups is that you're continuously learning, and not just learning but changing your perspective. So there's no point where you're like, well done, your value proposition gets an A star, it's done, don't learn anything else about that now, just like move on now to UX. You have to then say, okay, we've got this value proposition. We're using this as the thing that we are constantly coming back to, whether it's sales, marketing, product, all that kind of stuff. It's the thing that we're saying, are we focused on delivering the right kind of value? But it's constantly changing, and you're constantly learning more stuff about it. And even if you're like really happy with it one day, and everyone's like, oh, Phil, that workshop you did was really great. We got to a great place with the value proposition. In a week's time, it may be worth nothing because you learn something totally different and you have to pivot. So all of these things, they're like tectonic plates shifting around. Your product is changing, and your UX is changing, UI is changing, your website's changing, your marketing message is changing, the conversations people are having with sales are changing. They're constantly referring back to this value proposition, and that's changing as well. It's no wonder that people find that really, really difficult. And it would be much easier if you could just say, let's do this sequentially. Let's say, we're putting the foundations in place. That's the value proposition. It's done. Like nobody touched that for 2 years. We're just going to run with it. That's how it's going to be. Now let's build the sales function on top of the value proposition. And next to that, the marketing function, product, and all the rest of it. And life just isn't that simple. Unfortunately, you're never going to get a gold star. You're never going to graduate. It's just constant learning forever.
Messy.
Yeah.
Messy.
And the way the fundraising system is set up, it's also helping in that behavior, in the way that if you think about like what's the job to be done, the job of the VC is to separate the things that are going to get traction from the things that are not going to get traction, right? So when you have a meeting with them, they would say, like, you need to go to market. You need to go to market yesterday. Why? Because they want to know whether it's good or not, right? They want to know whether they can invest or not. And if it's not good, they're not going to invest. And if it's getting traction, they will invest, right? So whenever you think about, like, most of the funders that we talk with, that they're trying to do around, everybody tells them the same thing. We would like to invest with more traction. What does that mean? I want to have more confidence that you're onto a winner, right? So that's why there's this like thirst to go to market as soon as possible. What you're seeing is that the VC doesn't care whether all the startups that they see eventually get a product that gets traction. They want to know which are the good ones and which are not the good ones. Probability is against you in the way that most startups don't get traction. So if you don't set yourself up to change, the chances are that if you go to market with your first value prop, it's less than 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,000,000 that you're going to get traction, right? If you don't, and if you set yourself up to be able to change the value proposition in time to not run out of money, then your chances start to go higher, right? And then that's one of the big problems, right? That the way the system is designed is not to try to make more startups more successful. It's just to separate the ones that manage to get the first value prop well, that they were lucky enough or they were visionary enough to be able to go from point A to point Z without going through B, C, D, E, and the whole other alphabet, which is what I have to do when I build the value prop. I have to go through the full alphabet because I'm not Kanye West that can drop up a record with absolutely every song being 10 out of 10. I can't. So I have to test it and I have to change it. And the chances are, if you just look at the maths, is that if you've not set yourself up to be able to change in a cost-effective way, you're going to bleed before you make it. That doesn't mean that some of them do, right? Some people can and have this brilliant mind that can create this product that resonates, that has enough traction to start resonating and start going somewhere. But that's part of the problem too. And I say that as being a venture partner in a fund that I co-founded in Latin America. And the first thing we did is we commissioned a bit of research around, and the research came back. It's like, guys, you're the problem.
Wow.
You, the VCs, are the problem, right? It's like, oh, well, okay, great. We should behave in a different way then. And we try to behave in a different way in that space, but it's very hard. It's very, very hard because their job is completely different. And that's one of the things that most founders don't understand. You need to see this job as what they're doing. They just want to know whether you have that value, because if you have the value proposition from the beginning, you spend a little less money, you go to market, and you're tractioning. But the chances are that you don't. So what do you want to do? You want to run the dice?
Another great reason to do this then, I guess, is as you say, increase your chances of getting investment. So far we've got that in itself, like you can go to VCs, you're more likely to get money behind you. Traction as a data point is really useful, but traction as an actual sales tool, you actually have a waiting list of people available, and that sense of kind of being oversubscribed before you launch obviously makes it kind of easier to kind of make those initial sales. And of course, just reducing the need to rework and reinvest and go over building new databases, whatever it is, getting 50% down the road and then realizing that nobody wants your product. I guess the next question is, if you're sitting there listening to this podcast, you've built your own startup. What is it that you need to do to prove that you've got that traction? What is the test, and how do you actually
so
do it?
I'll work backwards. Of course, traction means clients, paying clients, right? That's the holy grail. I've got 3,000 paying customers. Okay, you've proven that there's a market, that people have enough problem, and that they find that your value proposition resonates. They find that the way you created your product is sticky, and you have people that are paying for it. That's great. You go back and back and back and back. What I do before that is what I call a pilot. And a pilot is a non-scalable way of delivering your service or your product in a way that is not cost effective, that you're not making money, but that you're getting at least 30% of your customers saying, if you disappear, I'll be extremely disappointed. And that's a way of tracking towards product market fit. And for me, that's the acid test. I had apps that had like 1 million downloads, and people I had a weather app in the UK, okay? Millions of downloads. And I remember this review, 1 star, and the review read, "It's raining today." And it's like, great, thank you for that, right? If you test the product, the pilot product, and you ask people, what happens if tomorrow I tell you that you don't get access to this anymore, I go away, and they say, I'll be strong, they give you 3 options: nothing, I'll be disappointed, or I'll be very disappointed. That means that they're thinking about doing it how they were doing it before you came, and they don't like that. That means that they've taken your product and now they are adopting your product. If they say, I'll be disappointed, but I can live without, it means that they're still looking for another solution. And I don't care means I don't care, right? So 40% in that space that says like, I'll be disappointed. This is going to be painful for me. I don't want to go back to using whatever I was using before. So a pilot with that is not scalable, that it's not profitable. Before that, a waiting list. At least you're not proven the execution bit of the product, but you've proven that what you're thinking to build is something that people are willing to pay for. Yeah. And before that is a series of conversations, of course, and like a really good qualitative market testing exercise.
And what specifically do you mean by a waiting list?
Yeah, I was going to ask. And what actually like practical things like do you have to support that waiting list, like videos or content, like what kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's the value prop. So what we do is we start with the first 30 to 40 people onto the waiting list are done manually over WhatsApp, where you read the value proposition out one by one. You get them to score it, and then you tell them how much it cost. And at the end of this, would you like me to call you when the product is live? And they can say yes or no and so forth. And after that, once we've like really worked the value prop on that space of WhatsApp, we move it onto a landing page, and then we beat people through. Don't get me wrong, these are not clients. These are people on a waiting list. Less than 50% of them are going to convert into trying the product and paying for it at least once. Okay? I am not saying that is the same as having 1,000 customers, but I'm saying it's much better than having 50 conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
The idea is how close can you get to having customers without having a pilot is a waiting list. Also, by the time you build your landing page and start bringing traffic to it, you're starting to build yourself an understanding of how much it's going to cost to acquire a lead. Now, this is something very important. 90% of people that we talk to think that building a waiting list is a mechanic exercise of writing some marketing onto a landing page and driving traffic. And that's the popular culture kind of like, this is what building a waiting list. No. In my experience, the difficult part of building a landing page is designing a value proposition that people find extremely desirable. And that's why our landing pages have spelling mistakes on it. Because it proves the point that, you don't need to be perfect to build a waiting list. You need to have a really good value proposition that even people read it and it's a spelling mistake. It's like, but if it does what it says on the tin, I'm in. I want that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the difficult bit about building a waiting list. Amassing a value proposition that people find extremely desiring. It's not about UI. It's not about type. It's not about it. It is about copy, right? Because you need to get that message across. But it's less about the way it looks. And we use a template. You always use the same landing page. And you're not allowed to build a landing page until you score a 10 out of 10 on desirability over WhatsApp. Because if you don't score 10 out of 10, you don't know what to put on the landing page. This concept of building a landing page before you figured out the copy, it's mental. It's mental. You don't even know what the message is. Why would you start designing a landing page?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, figure out the message, test the message, get a 10 out of 10 on the message, because the message is also perfect, right? When you talk about your value proposition, it's the perfect product. Your execution is going to be at a 6 at maximum. So if you don't score a 10 out of 10 when you pitch it as perfect, imagine if you score a 6 out of 10 when you're pitching it, and then you execute a 6, you're down to 3. Nobody's going to ever use it.
So it sounds like you're saying a lot of the, you do your sort of discovery in WhatsApp and in real low fidelity spaces, and then what people traditionally think of as that, waiting list, the actual website or MailChimp or wherever it is that's really sense checking and validating that what you learned in the WhatsApp phase is actually does actually work.
Yeah. So we learn during the landing page exercise, we learn more about where to find our customers. And then everyone that gets into the landing page and gets into the waiting list gets an interview. And we don't schedule them because you can't schedule these interviews. You just call them in the morning and it's like, hi, it's JP. I'm calling from this startup. I'm the founder. Do you have 2 minutes for me? And we run a scripted interview for anyone that has not seen the value proposition, a scripted exercise for someone that's seen the value proposition and subscribed, and everyone that's been through the onboarding and everyone that's become engaged. And they are all different questions. But the beauty of it is that you don't really need to prepare for these interviews because you have these scripts. And it's awkward to start with, and you're trying to read the letters while you're trying to talk to someone over WhatsApp. But once you've done 5, you see the founders going at it. And it's like, no, I book an hour and a half every day. I do 5 calls, move on. And then they walk into the room with a VC and they know the names of all their clients. They know how they struggle. They have conversations with them, There's this guy, Paul, it's like, that's interesting. So the idea of structuring the interviews is not only to make sure that we're extracting the right value, but also to give you scale at doing that. because you need to run a lot of interviews. We run 100 interviews before we even lay the first line into a landing page.
This is super interesting stuff, and I think really high value things for founders. So I'm going to try and summarize it into sort of steps that I think people could go. Please, if I go off track, then let me know. But basically, what we're saying is the first thing is to have a hypothesis of what your value proposition is, and then to actually just take it and test it with people. We're saying that can be over WhatsApp. What I like about that is it doesn't really require any production, beyond actually creating the value proposition itself, which is hard. But you don't need to invest in design, website, or any of these kinds of things. You're just having conversations, you're learning, but actually being structured, I think you're saying, is really important.
Super structured, because it gets fluffy if not.
Yeah, have a 1 to 10 scoring. Is this desirable or not? And don't leave that phase, as tempting as it inevitably will be to start building stuff. Don't leave that phase until you're at 10.
Yeah.
When you get to 10, then you can say, right, now we need a landing page. And the landing page is not an opportunity to be creative. The landing page is another structured thing where you need to put specific things on that page. And there's lots of things out there that people can use. There's products built specifically for this if people want to do this themselves. That then is an opportunity to understand where the audience is and to get them onto that page. So when you're generating traffic and you're using adverts to drive people there, you get this idea of this is how much it's going to cost to generate a lead. These are the channels that we're going to use. Those people go on the site. You can understand in a quantitative way how many of those people then convert and crucially, because you've got the cost on there, are interested in being an actual customer, not just thinking it kind of sounds nice. That then is kind of, I guess that's a validation stage. Then you open it up again with the interviews, and you can go a level deeper and learn and learn and learn. And and you can
do these interviews at scale, and you can run value proposition testing at scale with these people that have seen the value prop for the first time, and you can do it like super fast.
Yeah, and then presumably it's a loop, and then as you learn new things and you're careful not to just react to every single conversation that you have with somebody, you can then come back and you can say, I guess go right back to WhatsApp if you need to.
Yeah.
And then
we've killed features. We've replaced features a lot, even on landing page status, where we think it's good, because you were qualitative at that stage where you're running your WhatsApps, right? So you're starting to move into a quantitative space, and something that you thought was a good feature turns out that 80% of the people that are coming through are not. And that has to do with the fact that maybe you find an easier way to acquire a group that's maybe a little bit different, or maybe doesn't have that particular problem there, and they have this other problem that you should exploit. So when I said like a startup is like market who your client is, product, how your product is going to solve the problem, channel and model. Sometimes you realize that you can acquire those users, right? These 4 things, you're talking about tectonic plates. These 4 things are 2 massive things that for us is a quantum design. You change one and everything explodes. So you need to be playing at those 4 things at the same time, because you find a great segment, right? And you create a really good value proposition that they love, and the product is really good, and then they're willing to pay, but you can't acquire them. The cost of acquiring a user of those exceeds what they're willing to pay. You're done. There is no business model. It's game over. So working on those 4 things at the same time, it's part of it's quantum design. You can't move one at a time to try to figure it all out. So it happens that when you get into trying to acquire them, they moved a little bit, and it's cheaper to acquire here. So you need to change your value prop and make sure that the model still aligns, and people are willing to pay and so forth. So it is a constant process of trying to get those 4 things to fit. We call it the 4 fits. It's not something that we created. It's Brian Balfour that did. But you need to make them all fit. And when we find a version of the company that fits, it's like, okay, we found the design. We still need to execute, right? There's still 80% chances that this is going to flop. But we now have 20%. I feel a lot more confident that we should invest in this.
Let's manage expectations a bit here, because I'm listening to that and I'm going, well, why would you not do that? and as I thought that to myself, the main thing that I thought was, one, back to, VCs and investment and engineers sitting
Yeah.
on their hands and those kind of things. There's a sort of pressure to just, get started, and for whatever reason, people don't see this as this is actually getting started. Like there's an anxiety that builds, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know,
It's all
okay, yeah, so
pre-work.
it's exactly, it's pre-work. It's like, I want to do the work. I don't want to do I want to get out of pre-work and into work. So to manage expectations, how long
That's what I was
is
gonna ask.
is a good? I mean, this is, I don't know how long is a piece of string, but
Yeah.
typically
Well,
in your experience, I guess a better question is probably, at what point do you move from pre-work into, okay, now let's go write some
yeah.
code?
The answer to that question is I'll give you some timings, but we don't have a time. The gate is a gate. If you don't have 1,000 people on the waiting list, you can't move on to the pilot. And if you don't have 40% of your customers saying that they will be highly disappointed, you can't lay a line of code because it makes no sense. You don't know what people are going to be wanting, right? So these are gates for us, and we're very good at keeping to those gates because that's the way we've learned how to make things work. It really depends on, of course, who executes. If it's a startup founder that we're working with and we're working in a way that they're executing the interviews, they're finding the subjects and so forth, it takes a lot longer. But when me and Darn are doing it for a corporate, we've built the first gate for us is, because it's the first proof, is the waiting list. We've built 2,000 people onto a waiting list in 6 weeks. And then we present that to the board, and they say, okay, well, I want to run a pilot. And then we do 12 weeks of pilot. And 12 weeks of pilot is the bare minimum. And the other thing that is the key for me is you have, let's say, X amount of money to build a pilot. You cannot spend more than 20% of your money to do the first release. You can't. Because if you spend, it's another typical mistake that I see with startups, is that they spend all their cash to build a product and then they send it to market. And I describe it as, you're going to run a race and you're going to sit in a car and you're going to have no steering wheel. Why? Because the minute you go to market and you realize that people need this feature to be changed here and here and here, you're not going to have money to do it. So it's literally trying to go around the track without a steering wheel. You can't drive.
Yeah.
You've done all your driving before. You can't drive. It's like trying to code in all the turns into the system, right? And it's like, and if it goes off piste, you're going to end up in Taiwan.
And then we're going to need to raise more money, and we're going to need to go cap in hand and say, we just learned a bunch of stuff. Like, our product isn't quite right. Now, can you pay to make it right?
And if you really believe that the pilot is an exercise of design, you need to keep most of your design budget and your implementation budget for the pilot.
And presumably for, you mentioned, I think 2,000 people on a waiting list in 6 weeks.
That's if
I
it's
bet
consumer,
a lot of people,
yeah.
Yeah. But that's a very good point. The acquisition costs and the ease at which you can acquire people will have a huge variation depending on what the actual cost of your product is and how niche it is. All of those kinds of things. So I don't think everybody listening to this can say, yes, okay, let's set that as a target. But that is a big number in a short space of time. Presumably,
Phil, all of those users, aside from the 30 that were done on WhatsApp, have been done in the last week and a half.
wow.
Until a week and a half before the end of the project, we had 20 people on a waiting list.
This is. I mean, that is incredible. I've got to ask, how achievable is that for your average sort of founder? Because presumably the advertising budget for that is.
It was less than 20p or 30p per user.
Wow.
Again, the key is to write a value proposition that you're incredibly confident in, and that when people see it, it's like, I have that problem, this feature is great. I have that problem, this feature is great. Not your typical fluffy, this is going to be seamless, and it's going to have great UI, it's going to be very easy to consume, you will be able to do it really fast. It's like, no, I want to know what action or decision are you going to help me with?
Mhm.
What is it? The one I like the pressure thing and the timing, and it's like, oh, I'm going to reduce. Like, I'm going to tell you when to move to the next, to the next one, or when you're putting too much pressure on it, which is what your dentist always tells you when you go. It's like you're putting too much pressure on the toothbrush. It's like, okay, well, I'll tell you, I'll take those things away, right? The core is in drafting a really good value proposition that we try to get to a 50% conversion rate.
So I'm gonna just try and bring all this together.
Yeah.
I think the thing that you're saying here, and I 100% agree with this, by the way, is there is a way of validating your idea, reducing the risk, reducing the cost, reducing the likelihood of rework, that is, while it sounds very complex, very difficult, very expensive, very, very time consuming, it's actually much more doable than you would think. Like this is something that if you're sitting there on an idea and you haven't taken investment yet, and you're maybe still doing your job, and you really want to try and understand whether you've got a good idea, or actually more accurately, you want to try and get to a place where you have
there you
a
go.
good
It's
idea.
a process of transformation.
It's actually very, very doable, and it's not really what most other people are doing. So this is a way of getting an advantage, and sort of stealing a march on other people who are in this space. But it requires a very fundamentally different way of thinking about this problem. It requires you to think about value proposition and traction and all those kind of things as part of the business, part of the product, not just a thing that's like a bow put on the end of the product, as by the marketing team at the end of all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think one of the things that we've said kind of over and over again is, rather than thinking about when can we start building our product, how quickly can we get out there, and how and then we can pivot and do all those kind of things, is actually say that budget and that effort that you're going to assign to V1, take it and put it into the pilot, take it and put it into the testing, see that as the most useful fundamental thing that you can do. And I suppose the final thing is anticipate change, and the inevitability that where you start is probably going to be wrong, where you end has to be right. That's the key bit, is the bit in the middle of those two things. And I think this is awesome. I love the fact that it's doable. It's not easy, but I think it can be hugely valuable and make a huge amount of difference to the success of the startups people are founding.
Yeah, we call it traction first, and we even wrote a book on it, because we do it so much, and it's the only thing that we do. And yeah, I think it comes from a true feeling and understanding that there is a better way of building a startup. There is a better way of building a startup. So
where can people get the book?
They can go onto a landing page and request it. It's completely free. Anyone that wants a copy of the book, get it. We wrote it so that people can embrace our way of working. It is practical, okay? It is completely practical. There is no theory. You don't even know you're running a jobs to be done interview when we tell you how to structure it. It's not about theory. You're not going to see it in school. Nobody's going to talk about it in university. It's not academic. It's these are the tools that we use to go from 0 to 1. And it's the templates are there, and a lot of the things are there. A lot of the things are in our circle community also. But yeah, anyone that wants to read it, just reach out to whosvalue.com and we'll send you a copy.
I'm going on holiday tomorrow, and it's coming with me. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, JP. I feel like I've learned a million things today.
It's been really good.
Thank you.
Great to chat.
It's been really great. So where can people find you? Whosfabio.com.
Whosfabio.com, correct.
Any other social channels or places people?
We're on LinkedIn, and I think we keep a Spotify with all of our talks. But yeah, just follow us on LinkedIn, whether me, Darren, or who's Fabio, and you get our videos and yeah, us talking about our method basically, which is basically us saying the same things over and over again in a different way.
Yeah, nice. We will make sure that all the links for those are in the show notes. And I really would recommend following JP on LinkedIn, because the videos that he posts are excellent, and I think if you enjoyed this episode, there's plenty more where that came from. Great. Okay, so as for us, cultproducts.yaya.co for more information about what we're building. But of course, the main thing is please like and subscribe to the podcast, and share it in WhatsApp groups, LinkedIn groups, wherever you're talking to people about building startups. Please, really does help to sort of spread our message around a bit more. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We will be back next week. Thanks, JP. Thanks, Adam. And let's play ourselves out with the theme tune again.
Cool. Here it goes.
Nice. That was great.
Yeah. JP,
That's very good.
brilliant.
Enjoyable, very enjoyable.
That was massive.
I've learned a shit ton.
Yeah.
Listen to you, that's great. Really impressive. Really impressive.
I could have kept going all day.
Yeah. I did say that me and Darren love the sound of my voice, didn't I?
How long have you guys been doing it together for then? How long have you two been?
A million years. So
we
we started working